For my 71st birthday, I threw a beautiful party and invited my children. No one showed up. I called my youngest son, and my daughter-in-law yelled in the background, "Tell that poor old woman we have more important things to do." The next day, she got a surprise when trying to enter the house. I am glad to have you here. Follow my story to the end and comment what city you are watching from. That way I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Frances, and I am 70 years old. I never thought I would reach this age feeling invisible inside my own family. But that morning of March 15th, while preparing my birthday party, I still kept hope in my heart. I had spent 3 days scrubbing every corner of the house, preparing my children's favorite dishes. The dining room table looked immaculate, with the embroidered tablecloth I had made myself. The napkins were carefully folded, sitting next to the good china that only ever saw the light of day on special occasions. The rich scent of slow-cooked pot roast filled the entire kitchen. That same roast, my oldest son Charlie always swore nobody could make quite like me. The hours dragged by. At 6 in the evening, when everyone was supposed to arrive, I sat in the living room staring out the window. Every engine hum made me jump from the armchair thinking they were finally here, but the cars just kept rolling past my house. By 7 o'clock, the silence had become deafening. The food was growing cold on the counter, and the candles I had pushed into the cake were beginning to melt away. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it echoing in my ears. I picked up the phone with trembling hands and dialed Charlie's number. "Hello." His voice answered, but it sounded distant, distracted, like he was glued to the television. "Charlie, honey, it's me. Are you on your way? Dinner has been ready for a while." There was a heavy pause. I could hear voices in the background, laughter, the blare of a TV screen. "Oh, Mom, I completely forgot. We're over at the neighbor's place. Sophia put together a get-together." Sophia, my daughter-in-law, the woman who from the very day she married Charlie had made me feel like an absolute stranger in my own bloodline. "But honey, it's my birthday. I made all the food you guys love. I cleaned the whole house." "Mom, don't be dramatic. You know how these things go. Next time, give us more of a heads up." More of a heads up. I had been reminding them for weeks. I had called every single one of my 4 kids to confirm they were coming. They had all said yes. And the others, Anna, Robert, Michael, are they not coming either? "I don't know, Mom. Everyone's got their own thing going on. You get it." No, I didn't get it. I didn't understand how I had raised 4 children who now treated me like a burden, as if my 71st birthday was nothing but a nuisance in their busy lives. "All right, honey, have fun." "Mom, don't be like that. We'll drop by to see you later." I hung up the phone, knowing perfectly well that later meant never. I sat there in the living room armchair, suffocated by the silence and the smell of all that food nobody was coming to eat, but something deep inside me refused to just swallow it. I grabbed the receiver again and dialed Michael, my youngest. He had always been the most affectionate, the one who spent the most time clinging to me when he was a little boy. The phone rang several times before he picked up. "What's up, Mom?" "Michael, sweetheart, are you coming to dinner? It's my birthday and I made everything you guys like." I heard a shuffle on the other end, like he was pulling the phone away from his face. Then, clear as glass, Sophia's voice pierced through the background. "Tell that poor old woman we have more important things to do." The world stopped spinning. Those words buried themselves into my chest like rusty blades. That poor old woman. That was how my daughter-in-law saw me. That was how they all saw me. Michael came back on the line, his voice thick with awkwardness. "Mom, I can't right now. I've got commitments." "It's fine, honey. Have a good night." I hung up and just sat there, feeling the hot tears finally break loose and trace down my cheeks. 70 years of life, 50 years, bled entirely dry for my children. And this was my reward. A table covered in cold food and the absolute certainty that to my own flesh and blood, I was nothing more than that poor old woman who kept bothering them with her needs. I stood up slowly and walked into the kitchen. I packed all the food into containers. I washed the plates no one had dirtied. I blew out the candles on a cake no one had sung over. With every motion, it felt like a vital piece of my soul was snapping in half. I went to bed early that night, but sleep never came. Sophia's words kept bouncing around the hollows of my skull. That poor old woman. Poor. Did they really believe I was poor? If they only knew the truth. For the first time in decades, I tallied up the sacrifices I had made. The nights I stayed awake nursing their fevers, the money I drained to put them through school, The times I walked past store windows in worn-out clothes just so I could give them what they needed. And now when the only thing I wanted was to spend my birthday with them, I didn't even deserve that. Something shifted in the dark that night. Something broke, sure, but something else woke up. Staring at the ceiling shadows, I made a choice. I wasn't going to play the role of the poor old woman anymore, surviving on the emotional crumbs they tossed my way. It was time they learned who Frances Mitchell really was. The days right after my birthday drifted by in a gray fog. I couldn't scrub Sophia's words out of my brain. That poor old woman. Every time the echo hit me, a toxic cocktail of grief and rage flared up in my gut, and I had no idea what to do with it. I found myself doing something I hadn't done in years, looking through old photographs. I dragged the cardboard boxes out from the bedroom closet, the ones holding decades of buried memories. With every glossy print I picked up, the brutal reality of how far I had fallen in the family hierarchy became clearer. There I was, at 25, freshly married to Frank, holding a baby Charlie. Back then, my eyes practically glowed with hope. Frank was working construction, and I poured my entire existence into making a home. We were broke, that much was true, but we were happy. Or at least I was. I flipped the heavy album page and found a picture of Charlie at 5 years old, right after Anna was born. I looked exhausted, but radiant, cradling my baby girl while Charlie gripped my skirt. Frank had already started drinking more than his fair share by then, but I was still naive enough to believe things would turn around. The next few photos documented the arrival of Robert, and shortly after Michael. 4 kids in 8 years. My youth evaporated into a haze of diapers, bottles, and sleepless nights. Frank became a ghost in his own house, absent either because of a double shift or the bottom of a bottle. I became father and mother rolled into one tired body. I stopped at a photograph that shattered my heart. It was Charlie's elementary school graduation. There I stood, wearing a dress I had altered 3 different times because there wasn't a dime for a new one. Clapping with tears of pride as my son received his award for top of the class. Frank didn't show up that day. He was passed out on a bar stool somewhere across town. I kept turning pages, remembering every single time I had to choose between my own survival and my children's desires. When Charlie wanted to go to summer camp, I pawned my only gold ring to cover the fee. When Anna needed new shoes for the school year, I wore my boots with holes in the soles for another 6 months. When Robert caught pneumonia, I didn't eat for 3 days just to afford the antibiotics. But it wasn't just the money. It was everything. My time, my energy, my future. Before getting married, I had dreamed of going to college to be a teacher. I loved the idea of guiding kids, of being a turning point in their lives. But the second Charlie arrived, I locked that dream in a drawer and threw away the key. My singular mission was to be a mother, and that required every drop of blood I had. I reached the photos from when Frank got sick. Liver cancer, the doctor had said. Too many years of cheap liquor had finally called in the debt. For 2 brutal years, I nursed him day and night. I measured his meds, I bathed him, I fed him. I changed his soiled sheets when his body finally gave up on him entirely. My kids were grown adults by then, but not a single one offered to step in. "You've always been good at that kind of stuff, Mom," Charlie would say whenever I begged him to take just 1 night shift so I could sleep. When Frank died, I foolishly thought I might finally get a sliver of peace. I was wrong. I was instantly demoted to the 24-hour on-call grandmother. Charlie and Sophia started dumping their kids at my house every weekend. "We just need some time to reconnect," they would say. Anna pulled the exact same trick with her twins. Robert would drop off his daughter whenever his job demanded travel. And Michael. Well, Michael only ever materialized in my doorway when he was short on rent. I packed the photographs away and walked to the kitchen to brew some coffee. While waiting for the water to boil, I stared out the window into the backyard. The old swing set Frank had built for the grandkids was still standing there rusting. I remembered the endless afternoons I spent pushing them under the sun, listening to their laughter, feeling useful and loved. But when was the last time one of those kids came over just to see me? When was the last time one of my own children called just to ask about my day without a hidden agenda attached to the greeting? I sat at the kitchen table, wrapping my hands around the warm mug, feeling the crushing gravity of my age. 70 years old and I owned nothing. Not even my own dignity, or so it seemed. But then a memory sparked, something I had kept buried for years, a secret not even Frank had fully known. When my mother passed away 15 years ago, she left me a few parcels of land just outside city limits. Land that, from the whispers I'd heard on the news, was now worth serious money due to the massive urban sprawl pushing into the area. I had immediately drafted the paperwork to put those properties in my kids' names without saying a word. I thought it was the noble thing to do, a way to secure a financial safety net for their families. But I never actually went down to sign the final transfer. The papers were still sitting in my dresser drawer, waiting for my ultimate green light. In that exact moment, sipping bitter coffee in the dead quiet of my kitchen, a realization hit me like a freight train. Maybe I wasn't as poor as Sophia thought. Maybe I was holding a lot more leverage than I had realized all these years. I stood up and marched to my bedroom. I yanked open the nightstand drawer where I kept my vital records. There they were, yellowed at the edges but legally ironclad. The deeds to the land my mother had left me, parcels of dirt that could very well be worth a fortune today. For the first time in days, a real smile cracked across my face. Maybe it was time Frances Mitchell stopped playing the role of the poor old woman and finally became the powerhouse she always had the right to be. The week following my birthday, I tackled a project I had been putting off for years, organizing my legal paperwork. It wasn't just about the deeds I had unearthed. I needed a ruthless inventory of exactly what I had to my name. If I was going to make bold moves regarding my future, I needed the absolute truth on paper. I pulled out a battered shoebox where I had hoarded utility bills, receipts, and bank statements for decades. I dumped it on the dining room table and started sorting the chaos into neat piles. Power bills, water statements, bank documents, insurance policies. And right at the bottom, wrapped tight in a plastic sleeve, the documents my mother had handed me before she took her last breath. My mother, Eleanor Mitchell, was cut from a very different cloth than me. While I bled myself dry for my family, she had always operated with a cold, practical independence. She had hustled her entire life, running a food stand at the county market, saving every dime to quietly buy up small plots of dirt on the edge of town. "Real estate is the only thing that won't wake up one day and break your heart, kid," she used to tell me. When she passed, I was drowning so deep in caring for a dying Frank that I barely registered the stack of paper the attorney handed me. I stashed them away, swearing I'd look at them later. That later turned into 15 years. Now, with my reading glasses sliding down my nose, I scrutinized every single document. The first lot was located right in the middle of what was now the town's booming commercial district. Half an acre, according to the ink. The second sat right off the new interstate highway. And the third. The third one literally stole the breath from my lungs. It was an acre and a quarter sitting precisely on the footprint of the largest luxury shopping center in the county. That exact same mall my kids flocked to every weekend. The place where Sophia bought her overpriced designer clothes. The place where my grandkids went to the movies. With shaking fingers, I dug through my purse for last week's local paper. I had seen a commercial real estate listing for that specific zip code. When I found the current price per square foot, I had to grip the edge of the table and run the math 3 separate times just to make sure I wasn't losing my mind. If my numbers were right, the land under that mall alone was worth north of $4 million. The room started to spin. For 15 years, I had lived counting pennies at the grocery store, losing sleep over the heating bill, pawning my memories to bail out my kids. And the whole time, I had been sitting on a dragon's hoard. But there was one critical detail I needed to confirm. I vaguely remembered that when I tried putting the deeds in my kids' names, the lawyer had warned me about a final legal hoop I never actually jumped through. I tore through the piles until I found a heavy brown folder stamped with the logo of Harrison and Associates. Mr. Harrison had been my mother's attorney and later mine. He was a sharp, old-school gentleman who always treated me with profound respect. When Frank died, he handled probate and barely charged me a dime because he knew I was drowning in medical debt. Inside that folder, I found a letter he had mailed me 5 years ago, right after I floated the idea of signing the land over to the kids. The letter read, word for word, "Mrs. Mitchell, As we discussed in my office, transferring these titles requires your notarized signature and the physical presence of the beneficiaries. Until that executes, you remain the sole, uncontested legal owner of the properties. I strongly advise you to consider this move carefully. Once the ink dries, it is entirely irreversible. I read the paragraph 5 times. I was still the sole owner. I had never signed a damn thing away. For over a decade, while playing the part of a struggling widow, I had been a millionaire without even knowing it. I sat frozen in that dining chair for hours, letting the reality wash over me. I thought about every single time my children had made me feel like an anchor dragging them down. The countless smirks Sophia threw at my faded sweaters, my cramped living room, my quiet life. The heavy, annoyed sighs Charlie would let out whenever I asked him for a ride to the clinic because I didn't own a car. I thought about last year when Michael got laid off and showed up at my door begging for a lifeline. I handed him the last $800 I had to my name, cash I had scraped together dollar by dollar over 6 months. He swore on his life he'd pay me back the second he got a paycheck. He never did. Every time I brought it up, he'd deflect with, "Come on, Mom, you know things are tight right now. I'll get you next week." And Sophia, who looked down her nose at the poor old woman, while I secretly owned the very ground that was worth more than she would ever earn in a lifetime playing pretend rich at her boutique job. Sleep was a ghost that night. I tossed and turned in the dark, my mind racing through the explosive possibilities laying at my feet. I could liquidate the assets and live like royalty until the day I died. I could travel, walk the streets of cities I'd only seen in magazines. I could buy a brand new wardrobe, a luxury car, a sprawling house. But inevitably, my thoughts drifted back to my kids. For 70 years, my happiness had been entirely chained to theirs. Could I really sever that chain now? First thing the next morning, I dialed Mr. Harrison's firm. The receptionist politely informed me that the old man had retired, but his son, Mr. Harrison Jr., had taken over the firm's portfolio. I demanded an appointment for that very afternoon. The office looked completely different from my last visit. It was all sleek monitors, minimalist glass desks, and a sharp young assistant who handed me a gourmet coffee while I waited. When Harrison Jr. walked me into his office, he was a spitting image of his old man. Polite, razor-sharp, and straight to the point. "Mrs. Mitchell, it's a pleasure. My father always spoke incredibly highly of you. How can I help you today?" I laid the whole story out on his desk. I slid the yellowed deeds across the glass and asked him for a brutal, realistic market valuation of the land. He studied the ink like a hawk, made 3 hushed phone calls, and an hour later delivered the news that permanently rewrote my reality. "Mrs. Mitchell, congratulations. You are holding the titles to commercial real estate valued at roughly $4.5 million, and because that transfer to your children was never legally executed, you have absolute dictatorial control over what happens to every square inch of it." $4.5 million. The punchline they called "the poor old woman was a multimillionaire." I walked out of that high-rise feeling like gravity didn't apply to me anymore. For the first time in half a century, I held the cards. I had power. And more importantly, I had the ultimate authority to decide who actually deserved my grace. The days following my meeting with Harrison Jr. were the most surreal of my life. On the surface, the matrix held steady. I woke up early, scrubbed the floors, watched my afternoon shows. But beneath the skin, my entire psychological architecture had been rebuilt. It felt like waking up from a 70-year coma. I decided to keep my mouth entirely shut about the gold mine. I needed breathing room to plot, to strategize exactly how this was going to play out. My whole life I had operated purely on maternal instinct, bleeding myself out for my kids without calculating the cost. This time, I was playing chess. The lawyer had laid out the playbook. I could liquidate everything and swim in cash. I could sell a chunk and hold the rest for passive income. Or I could partner with a developer and become a real estate mogul at 70. Every single option was equally terrifying and exhilarating. But before I pulled any triggers, I needed to run a stress test. I wanted to see exactly how my bloodline would react if they suddenly realized I was no longer an infinite free resource. I needed to know if they actually loved me or if they just used me. Tuesday morning, Charlie called. A weekday call from him was a massive red flag. I knew instantly he wanted something. "Hey, Mom, how are you? You sound different." "I'm doing fine, honey. What do you need?" I don't need anything, Mom. Just checking in. Seems like you're still holding a grudge about the birthday thing. Liar. Charlie never called just to check the emotional weather. I decided to play the game. I'm not holding a grudge, honey. I completely understand you all have much more important things going on. Don't say that, Mom. You know we love you. Actually, Sophia and I were thinking you could watch the kids this weekend. We got invited up to Aspen. And there it was, the hook hidden in the bait. I can't do it, Charlie. What do you mean you can't? You got plans? For the first time in my existence, I looked my son in the eye through the phone and lied. Yes, I have plans. A heavy, stunned silence suffocated the line. Charlie wasn't programmed to process the word no from me. What kind of plans, Mom? My own plans, honey. Things I need to take care of. But Mom, the flights are already booked. The kids can just crash at your place like always. It's not a big deal. Find a sitter. I am not available. I hung up the receiver before he could wind up another pitch. The phone immediately started ringing again. I let it ring. A bizarre cocktail of guilt and raw, unadulterated power washed over me. I had never tasted anything like it. The next day, Anna took her shot. Her script was a carbon copy of Charlie's. First, the fake wellness check, then the desperate plea to watch the twins because of a massive emergency at the office. When I gave her the exact same hard no, the mask slipped. Mom, I don't know what your problem is lately. You're acting like a completely different person. Maybe I am a different person. Anna, are you sick? Do you need me to take you to the clinic? The irony was thick. She only ever cared about my health when it threatened her free childcare. I am perfectly fine. I'm just busy. Busy with what? You literally never have anything to do. That sentence cut deeper than Anna probably intended. To her, my entire existence was so blank, so utterly devoid of value, that the mere concept of me having a schedule was offensive. Well, things change. I have things to do. I hung up and powered down the phone. I needed total silence to think. Thursday morning, while picking out produce at the grocery store, I bumped into Martha, my neighbor of 40 years. She had known me since I first moved into the neighborhood, a terrified, pregnant newlywed. Francis, you look different. Everything okay? Everything is wonderful, Martha. Better than it's ever been. You just look. I don't know how to put it. You're standing taller. You look fierce. Martha wasn't wrong. I was standing taller. I was armored with a secret that nobody else knew. I held a nuclear code in my purse, and the radiation was changing my DNA. Martha, do you think a woman our age can just rip up the floorboards and start a completely new life? Oh, honey, what kind of crazy talk is that? At our age, the only thing left on the to-do list is dying with a little bit of dignity. But I had zero interest in dying with dignity. I wanted to live with dignity. And for the very first time in 70 years, I had the absolute financial firepower to demand it. That afternoon, Harrison Jr. called my cell. Mrs. Mitchell, we have major movement. A commercial development firm caught wind that you hold the title to the mall footprint. They want to bypass the market and make a preemptive cash offer. They're putting $5.2 million on the table. $5.2 million. A massive premium over our most aggressive estimates. How long do I have to think about it? No immediate rush, ma'am. But if you want to lock in that premium, we'd need ink on paper by early next week. I also have to ask, have you looped your children into this conversation yet? No, and I have absolutely no intention of doing so anytime soon. Understood. I just need to verify on the record that you are making this move of your own free will, without any external pressure. I paced the hardwood floors of my house until 3 a.m. that night. Every scuff on the baseboards, every faded patch of wallpaper triggered a memory of the relentless grind. The decades of suffocating my own fires just to keep other people warm. Friday morning, the verdict was locked in. I called the lawyer and gave him the green light to sell the crown jewel, the mall property. That cash alone was enough to permanently alter the trajectory of my universe, and I'd still have the other 2 lots sitting in the vault as an insurance policy. Excellent, Mrs. Mitchell. Shall I draft the closing documents for next week? Yes, but I have one non-negotiable condition. This stays under a total blackout until the wire hits my account. Client privilege, ma'am. Not a word. After dropping the phone, I sank into my favorite armchair, and for the first time in an eternity, A genuine, unburdened smile stretched across my face. Not because I was rich, because I was finally free. That afternoon, as if the universe was actively testing my spine, Sophia marched up my driveway unannounced. She was dragging the kids and an overnight bag. "Hey, mother-in-law, good thing you're home. Charlie and I booked a last-minute flight to Vegas. The kids are staying here." It wasn't a question. It wasn't a favor. It was a royal decree handed down to the peasant staff. "No, Sophia, the kids cannot stay here." Sophia stared at me like I had just spoken to her in dead Latin. "What do you mean, no? You always take them." "Well, the schedule has changed. I can't do it." "Why not? What could you possibly have to do that's so important?" There it was again, that dripping condescension. The absolute certainty that my existence was a zero on the board, a blank space waiting to be filled by their convenience. "I don't owe you an itemized itinerary, Sophia." Her face hardened. The shock mutated into pure, venomous irritation. "I don't know what your malfunction is lately, but you are acting completely unhinged. I seriously hope you aren't losing your mind like crazy old Eleanor." Eleanor, my mother, the genius who had quietly built the financial empire that Sophia couldn't even fathom in her wildest, greediest dreams. My mother wasn't crazy. She was a dangerously smart woman. Sophia stormed off my porch, yanking the kids by their sleeves and muttering trash under her breath that I couldn't quite catch. I didn't care. For the first time, I had drawn a line in the concrete, and the rush was intoxicating. Monday morning, I was going to sign the deed over. By Tuesday, the money would clear. And very shortly after that, my family was going to find out that the poor old woman they loved to kick around had officially left the building. I was out of bed before the sun came up on Monday. Execution day. I pulled out my armor. A tailored navy blue dress I had bought for Frank's funeral and kept wrapped in plastic ever since. I sat at the vanity, applied a sharp stroke of lipstick, and pinned my hair back perfectly. When I walked into Harrison's conference room, the buyers were already circling the table. 3 sharks in bespoke suits who stood up and treated me with a level of reverence I hadn't felt in decades. To them, I wasn't a poor old woman. I was the gatekeeper to a massive corporate asset, and that made me a god. The paperwork took 2 grueling hours. Initial here, sign there. With every stroke of the pen, I was burning down my old life and building a fortress for the new one. When the dust settled, the lawyer slid a cashier's check across the mahogany. I had to stare at the commas for a full minute to process the reality. $5.2 million. Payable exactly to Frances Mitchell. "Mrs. Mitchell," Harrison said, clicking his briefcase shut. "Have you put any thought into the remaining 2 parcels? Put them in a holding pattern. I want to see how the fallout settles before I make my next move." I walked out of that building floating 2 feet off the pavement. I didn't drive back to my empty house. Instead, I ordered a cab straight to the luxury mall that had just made me an oligarch. It was a wild psychological trip, walking past the designer storefronts, knowing that just hours ago I owned the dirt beneath their marble floors. I took a seat at the high-end espresso bar in the atrium and ordered a ridiculous, overpriced latte I never would have glanced at yesterday. Sipping the foam, I watched the crowds drift by, swiping credit cards on things I had spent a lifetime denying myself. I thought about the times I had dragged my grandkids through these very corridors, clutching a handful of wrinkled dollar bills, constantly whispering that we couldn't afford this toy or that snack because the prices were insane. My phone vibrated against the table. Charlie. "Mom, where are you? I'm at your house and it's locked tight." "I'm at the mall." "The mall." "What the hell are you doing there? You never go to that side of town alone." "Well, I'm here today." "Look, I need you to head back to the house. Sophia wants to have a serious talk with you." Oh, Sophia. The same woman who branded me a poor old woman was now demanding an audience, undoubtedly to chew me out for ruining her Vegas getaway. "Tell Sophia if she wants to lecture me, she can come do it to my face. I'm right here." "Mom, don't make this difficult. Just go home." "No, Charlie. If she wants to talk, she knows where to find me. I'm on the 2nd floor terrace cafe." I hung up and took another sip. I sat back and watched the clock. 40 minutes later, Charlie and Sophia came riding up the glass escalator. Sophia looked like she was chewing glass, visibly furious that I had forced her to drive across town. Mother-in-law, what exactly are you doing, sitting around here acting like you own the place? That specific choice of words made my blood sing. If she only had a clue. I'm having a latte. Pull up a chair. Charlie dropped into the seat across from me, but Sophia remained standing, arms crossed like a prison guard. Listen to me, Sophia snapped. I don't know what kind of midlife crisis you're trying to pull, but you need to snap out of it. You completely screwed us this weekend. We lost out on a massive trip because you decided to throw a tantrum. I didn't throw a tantrum, Sophia. I had prior engagements. What engagements? You don't have a social circle. You don't have a job. You have literally nothing going on. Your one and only job is to be the safety net for this family when we call you. Every syllable was designed to draw blood, but the armor held. In fact, it just confirmed that I was about to drop the hammer exactly where it belonged. My one and only job, I repeated, letting the words hang in the air, is to take care of myself. Charlie leaned forward, his brow furrowed. Mom, are you feeling all right? Are you getting confused? Like early onset stuff? Dementia. Because I finally grew a spine, the immediate diagnosis was brain rot. My mind has never been sharper, Charlie. Sophia leaned over the table, her voice dropping to a toxic whisper. Look, I don't know who you think you are all of a sudden, but you need a harsh reality check. You are an elderly woman entirely alone with absolutely zero leverage. We are the ones pulling the weight in the real world. We are the ones who matter. Your role is to sit by the phone and wait for instructions. My role? I asked, my voice terrifyingly calm. Yes, your role. Babysitting. Staying out of the way. Not being a liability. That's the deal when you get old. And what exactly is my compensation for this role? Sophia let out a cruel, barking laugh. Your compensation is that we allow you to exist in our orbit. We tolerate you even though you've outlived your usefulness. That was it. The safety was officially off. I stood up, smoothed out my navy dress, and locked eyes with my daughter-in-law. You know what, Sophia? You hit the nail on the head. I am an elderly woman, but your math is catastrophically wrong on everything else. Wrong about what? About you being broke? About you having zero leverage? About you needing our charity to survive? Charlie looked completely lost. Mom, what the hell are you talking about? I unclasped my purse, pulled out the bank envelope, and slapped the cashier's check face up on the table. The ink was impossible to misread. $5.2 million. I'm talking about this. Sophia's jaw physically dropped. Charlie snatched the slip of paper like it was on fire, his hands shaking violently. Mom, what is this? Where did you steal this from? From the liquidation of a commercial asset I held the sole title to. Land your grandmother left me 15 years ago. What land? Sophia asked, the venom completely drained from her voice, replaced by a hollow squeak. The dirt we are currently sitting on. This entire mall. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crack the foundation. I watched their faces cycle through the stages of grief in real time. Confusion, denial, comprehension, and finally the most delicious emotion of all. Absolute, unadulterated panic. Mom, Charlie finally choked out. Why didn't you ever tell us you were sitting on an empire? Because my original plan was to sign it all over to you. Because I thought you needed the financial security more than I did. But recent events forced a massive pivot in my strategy. Sophia collapsed into the empty chair, the arrogant dictator routine entirely shattered. Francis, we had no idea. You had no idea I had capital. But you were perfectly aware you were treating me like absolute garbage. We never treated you like garbage, Charlie protested, though he sounded like a little boy lying to a teacher. Charlie, your wife explicitly called me a poor old woman 2 weeks ago on the phone. 10 minutes ago, she told me I was a useless burden that you merely tolerated. Charlie shot Sophia a look of pure murder, but she was too busy hyperventilating over the zeros on the check to even defend herself. Mom, if you had millions, why were you living like you were? Because I didn't know I had the authority to cash it out. I only found the loophole a week ago. And do you want to know what my very first instinct was? I wanted to split it 4 ways and fix everyone's problems. But then I remembered my birthday dinner. I remembered the decades of disrespect, and I realized none of you had earned a single cent of my sweat. I picked up my purse. Charlie lunged and grabbed my wrist. Mom, wait. We can talk this out. We can fix this. There is absolutely nothing left to fix, Charlie. You finally know my net worth, and I finally know your true colors. I pulled my arm back and walked toward the escalator without looking over my shoulder. For the first time in the history of this family, I was the one walking out. I was the one holding the keys. By the time my cab pulled into my driveway, my screen was lit up with 5 missed calls from Anna, 3 from Robert, and 2 from Michael. The bloodline telegraph was operating at maximum efficiency. That night, for the first time in 70 years, I powered my phone completely off and went to sleep without a shred of anxiety about who might need me. From now on, access to Francis Mitchell required clearance. The aftermath of the mall ambush was a Category 5 hurricane of unannounced visits, groveling voicemails, and desperate texts. Suddenly, my children, who hadn't been able to carve out 5 minutes for my birthday, had completely cleared their schedules for me. But I had mastered a new superpower, the lethal application of the word no. Anna was the first to breach the perimeter less than 24 hours after the check hit the table. She showed up with the twins, deploying her classic emotional human shield tactic. Mom, we really need to talk, she pleaded over the sound of her kids tearing through my hallway. We can talk, but the kids are not staying. Mom, it'll just be for an hour. No, Anna. If you want a seat at the table, you load them back into the minivan and come back solo. I watched the gears grind in her head. She was so used to weaponizing my grandchildren, knowing my maternal instincts would always override my boundaries. But the old operating system was dead. She came back 2 hours later, alone, radiating a completely alien sense of humility. Mom, Charlie filled me in on the inheritance, and I just want to say I am profoundly sorry if I ever made you feel invisible. It was never malicious. I let the silence hang, waiting for the inevitable pivot. I also wanted to ask if maybe you'd be open to throwing a lifeline toward my mortgage. The rates are killing me, and Anna, I am not paying off your house. But Mom, I'm your daughter. Isn't that what mothers with means do? Bail out their kids? Isn't it supposed to be that children respect their mothers? Anna short-circuited. For 10 solid minutes, she ran through every emotional manipulation tactic she had perfected since high school. For the first time, she hit a brick wall. Robert tried his luck the next afternoon. He brought a different playbook. He showed up with a massive floral arrangement and a card declaring me the greatest mother on earth. Mom, I am so incredibly sorry I missed your dinner. The quarterly pressure at the firm has been brutal. Right. So, Robert, what's the dollar amount? Let's skip the warm-up because we both know you didn't buy those flowers just to catch up. The blood rushed to his face. Okay, look, the firm is facing a massive liquidity crunch right now, and I thought maybe you'd be looking to diversify into angel investing. I have absolutely zero interest in acting as your venture capital firm, Robert. But Mom, it's a guaranteed ROI. You could double your principal in 12 months. My principal is perfectly secure right where it is. Michael was the final boss, and his visit was the only one that actually tested my resolve. He had always been the golden child, the baby of the family. Seeing genuine terror in his eyes hurt more than I wanted to admit. Mom, I know I completely blew it. I know I'm a mess. But I am begging you, I'm drowning in debt. The bank is about to foreclose on the condo. Where is Sophia? I asked, cutting through his panic. What? Your sister-in-law. The one who branded me a poor old woman. Why isn't she here groveling for the bailout? Michael stared at his shoes. She's at the house. She said she couldn't stomach looking you in the eye after the mall. How convenient. Mom, please. I just need 50 grand to stop the bleeding. I swear to God I'll— Michael, do you have any respect for me as a human being? The curveball stunned him. Of course I do, Mom. Swear to God. Because the last time we spoke on the phone, your wife screamed that I was a pathetic, broke old lady, and you didn't say a single syllable to shut her down. I froze. I didn't know what to do. You could have told her to shut her mouth. You could have hung up. You could have driven over the next morning to apologize like a man. You chose the path of least resistance. Mom, she was just stressed out. She didn't mean it. Michael, when someone hands you their resume of who they really are, you hire them on the spot. That night, after Michael walked out into the dark, empty-handed, I sat at the kitchen island and finalized the hardest executive order of my life. I was cutting off the capital supply. Not because I had stopped loving my children, but precisely because I loved them enough to stop funding my own disrespect. The next morning, I pulled the trigger on a move I'd fantasized about for decades. I hired a realtor and started touring real estate. With over $5 million liquid, I was leaving the rusted gutters of my old zip code in the dust. I closed on a sprawling mid-century modern tucked into a gated community. It had a massive wraparound deck, a heated 3-car garage, and a chef's kitchen I had only ever seen in architectural magazines. "Are you entirely sure you want to take on this much square footage?" the broker asked as I signed the inspection waiver. "It's a massive footprint for a solo buyer." "I am absolutely sure," I replied. "And I'm not going to be solo. I'll be living with myself. And frankly, that's top-tier company." Escrow cleared in 3 weeks. During that holding period, my kids launched a highly coordinated multi-front psychological war to crack the vault. Charlie weaponized his kids, bringing them by unannounced to soften the target. Anna dressed the twins in their Sunday best to parade them through my living room. Robert delivered a 5-page legally bound prospectus detailing exactly why his failing firm was actually a unicorn investment. But Michael's tactical strike was the cruelest. He called me sobbing at 2 a.m., claiming Sophia had finally packed her bags, that he was utterly abandoned, that I was his last tether to reality. "Mom, I'm your kid. I'm your youngest. Do you just hate me now?" "I love you immensely, Michael. But love doesn't mean acting as your permanent financial paramedic every time you blow up your life." "But I'm terrified, Mom. I literally don't know how to survive without a safety net." "Then it's high time you took the crash course." Moving day came and Martha was the only soul standing on the curb to wave me off. My children pulled a total blackout, likely hoping the sheer isolation would break my nerve and send me crawling back with open checkbooks. My new estate was a masterpiece. I had an entire solarium just for my orchids, a commercial-grade kitchen where I could cook purely for the joy of it, without factoring in the dietary demands of an army, and a master suite where I could wake up to the sun hitting the mountains. 2 months into the new life, I did something completely out of character. I booked a flight. I had always dreamed of feeling the ocean breeze, but the math and the calendar had never aligned. The board was clear now. I spent 10 days in Maui, booked into a penthouse suite at a 5-star resort, where the staff treated me like royalty. I walked the shoreline at dawn. I ate fresh seafood at tables with ocean views. And for the first time in 70 years, the only pulse I had to monitor was my own. When my town car pulled up to my driveway back home, my answering machine was flashing with 12 voicemails. Every single one was from my bloodline. Every single one was a distress flare. Charlie had been pushed out of his corporate gig. Anna had finally pulled the trigger on a brutal divorce and needed retainer money for the lawyers. Robert had officially filed for bankruptcy. Michael had been evicted and was sleeping on a buddy's couch. I sat at the Marble Island, poured a glass of expensive red wine, listened to the chaos back to back, and then hit delete on the entire archive without returning a single call. Eating dinner in the absolute quiet of my fortress, my mother's ghost echoed in the back of my mind. "Kid, the family that respects you is the family you earned. The one that treats you like a doormat, cut the cord." Eleanor had been dead right about a lot of things. The bulletproof nature of real estate, the absolute necessity of having your own money, and above all, the hard truth that love without baseline respect is just a hostage situation. 90 days later, Anna buzzed the security gate. She was flying solo, no kids, no armor, and for the first time in her adult life, she spoke to me like a peer. "Mom, I'm not here for a check. I am here for an apology." I buzzed her in and fired up the espresso machine. "Mom, I've spent the last few months doing a brutal autopsy on how we operated. You were entirely justified. We didn't respect you. We treated you like a utility bill that was set to autopay." "So what cracked the code?" I asked. "Honestly, at first I was just blindly furious that you locked the vault. But then the fog cleared. You spent decades wiring us for independence, breaking your back so we wouldn't have to struggle. And somewhere along the line, we collectively realized it was infinitely easier to just bleed you dry than to actually stand on our own 2 feet. It was the most brutally honest post-mortem I had ever conducted with one of my children. Anna, you have my forgiveness. But the old matrix is dead. We are never going back to how it was. I know. I just need you to know I love you. And it took getting cut off for me to realize that losing the inheritance wasn't the tragedy. The tragedy was losing my mother. That afternoon laid the foundation for a completely new dynamic with Anna. I formally retired my badge as the free on-call nanny, but we started building something genuinely bulletproof, rooted entirely in mutual respect. Charlie eventually dragged himself up my driveway to eat crow, though his apology was heavily rehearsed and lacked Anna's raw grit. Robert and Michael still float around the periphery, occasionally sending a text that thinly veils a plea for a wire transfer. I leave them unread. Today, 24 months after that catastrophic 75th birthday, I'm sitting in a multi-million-dollar estate. I book first-class flights whenever the mood strikes, and I maintain a fiercely guarded inner circle of family members who understand the new rules of engagement. I am no longer the silent, bleeding heart matriarch. I am Frances Mitchell, a 72-year-old titan who finally learned how to audit her own worth. And Sophia, the woman who branded me a poor old woman, is currently pulling double shifts at an Amazon fulfillment center because Michael's hustle couldn't sustain the illusion of luxury anymore. Every once in a while, we cross paths in the premium aisles at the grocery store. She immediately drops her gaze to the floor tiles the second our eyes lock. The universe has a remarkably ruthless way of balancing the ledger. And for the first time in my life, my accounts are perfectly in the black. Listening to Frances's journey, I am profoundly moved by the silent struggles that so many parents endure out of pure, selfless love. This story, which is shared strictly for educational and inspirational purposes, serves as a powerful mirror for all of us to examine how we treat the people who gave us everything. We often get so caught up in the relentless pursuit of our own lives that we mistakenly view our aging parents as permanent fixtures, forgetting that they too have dreams, feelings, and breaking points. Frances's awakening is not just about financial wealth. It is a profound reclamation of human dignity and self-respect. Her decision to stop funding her own disrespect is a vital life lesson for anyone who has ever felt undervalued in their relationships. True love cannot thrive where mutual respect is absent. By drawing a firm line, she did not abandon her children, but rather gave them the ultimate gift of tough love, forcing them to grow up and take responsibility. As we navigate our own lives, we must remember that boundaries are not walls built out of anger, but bridges built toward healthier connections. We should never wait until a loved one walks away to finally realize their immense worth. Let us actively choose to honor the sacrifices of those who paved the way for us, offering them our time, our gratitude, and our genuine presence. Material wealth can disappear in a flash, but the emotional legacy we leave behind through kindness and respect will echo through generations. I believe that the deepest form of humanism is treating the elderly not as burdens, but as walking libraries of wisdom, who deserve to live their final chapters in absolute peace. If you feel taken for granted today, find the courage to audit your own worth and demand the respect you naturally deserve. Conversely, if you have neglected someone who loves you, pick up the phone right now and mend that bridge before it collapses. Ultimately, a truly wealthy life is measured not by bank accounts, but by the authenticity, gratitude, and mutual respect we share with the people we call family. Disclaimer: the story and commentary provided above are intended solely for educational, motivational, and entertainment purposes. They do not constitute professional psychological, financial, or legal advice, and listeners should apply these lessons to their own lives based on their unique personal circumstances.